The Galactic Military Academy floated in the void between three star systems, its massive structure gleaming like a metallic jewel against the cosmic backdrop. For over 2,000 years, it had trained the finest warriors from across the galaxy, producing legendary commanders who had defended countless worlds from threats both known and unimaginable. Admiral Zexthar stood before the observation deck, his forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the newest batch of cadets prepare for their final examination. The Vorthak officer's crystalline skin reflected the starlight streaming through the reinforced windows, casting prismatic patterns across the polished floor. His elongated head turned slightly as footsteps approached from behind. "Admiral, the human cadets have arrived for the Crucible examination," announced Captain Velnara, her aquatic features showing obvious concern. The Aquarian's gills fluttered nervously as she spoke. "Sir, with all due respect, are we certain about including them in this particular drill?" Zexthar's compound eyes shifted to focus on his aide. The Crucible was legendary throughout the galaxy, a battle simulation so complex and challenging that it typically took the most elite cadet squads an average of 10 standard days to complete. Some squads had taken up to 3 weeks, with a few exceptional teams managing it in 7 days. The record holder was a mixed squad of Krillian shock troops and Zentari tacticians who had completed it in 4 days and 16 hours. The Terran Federation insisted their cadets participate in the standard curriculum, Zexthar replied, his voice carrying the weight of reluctant authority. Despite the fact that their homeworld is classified as a Class 12 death world, they claim their military training is equivalent to our standards. Captain Velnara's tentacles writhed with obvious skepticism. Earth, or Terra as it was known in galactic records, was one of only 17 worlds in the known galaxy classified as Class 12 death worlds. These planets were so hostile, so filled with predators, natural disasters, and environmental hazards that most species considered them uninhabitable death traps. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived on such a world was both fascinating and terrifying to the galactic community. The door to the observation deck hissed open, and 5 figures entered the preparation chamber below. Through the reinforced transparasteel, Zexthar observed the human cadets as they checked their equipment and reviewed their mission parameters. The squad leader was Sarah Chen, a compact woman with short black hair and eyes that seemed to constantly scan her surroundings. Her movements were precise and economical, speaking of years of military training that had begun long before she ever left Earth. According to her file, she had survived something called Special Forces Selection on Terra, a process that had a 97% failure rate among her own species. Marcus Rodriguez stood beside her, a tall man with broad shoulders and scarred hands that spoke of extensive combat experience. His personnel file mentioned service in the Amazon conflict zones and Arctic survival operations, terms that meant nothing to most galactic species but carried ominous implications given Terra's classification. The team's heavy weapons specialist was Dmitry Petrov, a bear of a man whose calm demeanor belied the violence his training record suggested he was capable of. His expertise with both human and alien weapon systems was noted as exceptional by every instructor who had worked with him. Keiko Tanaka served as the squad's scout and reconnaissance specialist. Her small frame moved with a fluid grace that reminded Zexthar of the apex predators from his own homeworld, though her smile seemed genuinely warm when she interacted with her teammates. Finally, there was David Thompson, the squad's medic and technical specialist. Despite his role as a healer, his training records included something called combat medicine and tactical field surgery, concepts that seemed contradictory to most galactic species, where medical personnel were considered non-combatants. "Beginning Crucible initialization," announced the automated system, its synthetic voice echoing through both the observation deck and the preparation chamber below. "Simulation environment, urban warfare scenario, Siege of Rex Prime. Objective: infiltrate enemy-held city, eliminate high-value targets, extract civilian population, and destroy military infrastructure. Expected completion time: 7 to 14 standard days. Zexthar leaned forward, his interest piqued despite his reservations. The Siege of Rex Prime was based on actual historical events, a brutal 3-month battle that had resulted in millions of casualties and the near destruction of an entire star system. The simulation was designed to test every aspect of military training: tactics, logistics, endurance, psychological resilience, and adaptability under extreme stress. Historical note, continued the system. Original battle duration: 93 standard days. Recommended cadet approach: methodical advancement with emphasis on casualty minimization and resource conservation. In the preparation chamber, Sarah Chen gathered her squad in a tight circle. Even through the observation deck's audio dampeners, Zexthar could hear the intensity in her voice as she addressed her team. All right, people, we've studied this scenario for weeks. The simulation is designed to test patience and endurance, but remember what Colonel Martinez always told us back on Earth. The enemy gets a vote, but they don't get to set the timeline. We're going in fast and hard. Marcus nodded, checking the power cells on his assault rifle. Standard Earth doctrine, then? Speed, shock, and overwhelming violence of action? Exactly. Dimitri, I want you ready to level any building that looks at us funny. Keiko, plot us the fastest route to the first objective. Forget about stealth approach vectors. David, prep for mass casualty treatment, but remember, the best medicine is killing the enemy before they can hurt our people. Zexthar's crystalline skin shifted from blue to a concerned purple. Captain, are you monitoring their tactical discussion? Yes, sir, Velnara replied, her own coloration darkening. They appear to be planning a direct assault approach. Surely they understand that the simulation is designed to punish aggressive tactics? The Crucible's virtual environment materialized around the human squad, transforming the chamber into a perfect replica of Rex Prime's war-torn capital city. Smoke-filled skies stretched overhead, broken buildings lined rubble-strewn streets, and the distant sound of weapons fire echoed from multiple directions. The simulation's artificial intelligence had already begun deploying enemy forces, virtual soldiers of the hegemony faction that had historically held the city for 3 bloody months. What happened next would be discussed in military academies throughout the galaxy for decades to come. Sarah Chen didn't pause to assess the situation or establish a defensive perimeter, as doctrine suggested. Instead, she pointed toward the tallest building in the distance, the enemy command center that was supposed to be the final objective of a week-long campaign. That's our target. Straight line, maximum speed. Keiko, I want continuous reconnaissance sweeps. Dimitri, suppress anything that moves. Marcus, you're with me on point. David, keep up and keep us alive. The squad moved out at a pace that made Zexthar's compound eyes widen in disbelief. Where other cadet squads would spend hours carefully mapping patrol routes and identifying threats, the humans simply began running directly toward their objective. Their movements were coordinated in a way that spoke of countless hours of training together. But their tactics seemed to completely disregard everything the Academy taught about careful advancement and measured progress. Contacts, 200 meters, multiple buildings. Keiko's voice crackled through their communications system as she spotted enemy positions. Instead of taking cover and planning an assault, Dimitri simply shouldered his heavy plasma cannon and began systematically destroying every building that might contain hostile forces. The virtual structures collapsed in spectacular displays of debris and flame, while Marcus and Sarah advanced through the destruction without breaking stride. Sir, Captain Velnara's voice was barely a whisper. Their ammunition expenditure rate is unprecedented. Zexthar could only nod in stunned silence as he watched the humans tear through defensive positions that should have taken days to overcome. Where other cadets would have carefully flanked enemy positions and engaged in prolonged firefights, the human squad simply destroyed everything in their path with such overwhelming firepower that resistance seemed to melt away before them. The first major objective, a heavily defended supply depot that typically took cadet squads 2 full days to capture, fell to the humans in 17 minutes. "This can't be sustainable," Velnara observed. "Their energy reserves and ammunition stores must be nearly depleted." But when the tactical display showed the humans' resource levels, both officers were shocked to discover that the squad was operating at nearly full capacity. Somehow, despite their seemingly wasteful tactics, they were managing their supplies with ruthless efficiency. "It's like they're fighting an entirely different war," Zexthar murmured, watching as David Thompson treated a simulated civilian casualty while simultaneously providing covering fire for his advancing teammates. The concept of combat medics was so foreign to galactic military doctrine that the Academy's systems hadn't even properly programmed responses for it. The second objective fell even faster than the first, where the simulation expected a complex urban warfare scenario involving careful building-to-building clearance operations. The humans simply created their own routes through the cityscape. Dimitri's demolition work opened straight-line paths through what had been elaborate defensive mazes, while Keiko's reconnaissance allowed the squad to avoid or eliminate threats before they could organize effective resistance. "Enemy armored division approaching from the east," the simulation announced, its AI desperately trying to adapt to the humans' unprecedented tactics. Sarah Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "David, what's the structural integrity of that overpass?" "Give me 30 seconds with some charges, and it won't have any structural integrity," the medic replied, while simultaneously analyzing both the bridge's construction and the approaching enemy vehicles. "Do it. Dimitri, I want suppressing fire on their advance elements. Keiko, find us an alternate route to the command center." What followed was a masterclass in improvised engineering and tactical adaptation. Within minutes, the humans had collapsed the overpass onto the enemy armored column, while simultaneously opening a new path through the urban terrain that the simulation's designers had never anticipated. The enemy forces, programmed to respond to conventional military tactics, found themselves completely unable to adapt to the humans' approach. As the first hour of the simulation drew to a close, Zexthar realized that the human squad was already approaching objectives that other cadet teams typically didn't reach until their 3rd or 4th day. Their progress was so far ahead of any recorded attempt that the simulation's AI was beginning to strain under the computational load of trying to provide appropriate opposition. "Captain," Zexthar said slowly, "I believe we may need to revise our understanding of human military doctrine." On the tactical display, the 5 human cadets continued their relentless advance toward the enemy command center, leaving a trail of destruction behind them that looked more like the aftermath of a natural disaster than a military operation. Yet somehow, despite the apparent chaos of their methods, their progress was methodical, efficient, and devastatingly effective. The Crucible simulation, designed to test the limits of military cadets over the course of weeks, was about to face its greatest challenge yet. A species that had evolved to fight for survival on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, where the concepts of overwhelming force and rapid action weren't just tactical preferences, but evolutionary necessities. The observation deck had filled with faculty members and senior officers as word spread throughout the Academy about the unprecedented performance in the Crucible simulation. Admiral Zexthar found himself surrounded by representatives from every major galactic species, all watching in fascination and growing concern as the human cadets continued their relentless advance. "This is impossible," muttered Professor Kethvar, the Academy's foremost expert on military tactics. The elderly Zentari's tentacles writhed with agitation as he studied the tactical displays. They've eliminated more opposition in 90 minutes than most squads encounter in their entire first week. Captain Velnara continuously updated the comparative analysis on her holographic display. Sir, at their current pace, they'll reach the primary command center in another 30 minutes. The simulation's AI is having difficulty generating appropriate opposition forces fast enough to maintain challenge balance. On the main screen, the human squad had just completed their assault on the third major objective, a communication nexus that typically required extensive planning and coordination to capture. Instead of the careful electronic warfare approach that most cadets employed, Sarah Chen had simply ordered Dmitri to destroy the entire building complex, while David simultaneously hacked into the backup systems from the rubble. Their approach to problem-solving is fundamentally different, observed Dr. Ilithera, the Academy's chief psychologist. The insectoid researcher's compound eyes tracked the human's movements with scientific fascination. Where our cadets are trained to minimize collateral damage and preserve infrastructure, these humans treat everything as expendable except the mission objective and civilian lives. Indeed, the humans' approach to civilian rescue had impressed even their harshest critics. While they showed no hesitation in destroying military targets with extreme prejudice, their efforts to locate and evacuate simulated civilians were exhaustive and compassionate. David Thompson had already saved more virtual lives than most cadet squads managed in their entire simulation runs. "Contact! Heavy resistance ahead!" Keiko's voice crackled through the communication system as she identified the next obstacle. "Looks like they've concentrated their remaining forces around the government district. Multiple defensive lines, automated weapon systems, and what appears to be their elite guard units." The simulation's AI, pushed beyond its normal parameters, had made a desperate decision. Instead of spreading defensive forces throughout the remaining urban terrain, it had consolidated everything into a final massive defensive position around the command center. This was the kind of entrenched opposition that historically forced cadet squads to spend days planning careful approaches and coordinated assaults. Sarah Chen studied the tactical data for approximately 15 seconds before making her decision. "New plan. We're not going around it. We're going through it. David, what's the power grid situation for this entire district?" "Primary power comes from 3 fusion generators in the sub-basements of the command complex," David replied while simultaneously treating a simulated injury to his own arm. "Secondary backup systems are distributed through underground conduits running beneath the main defensive positions. Dmitri, do you have enough explosives to bring down the entire power grid?" The big Russian's grin was visible even through his combat helmet. "I have enough explosives to bring down a small moon. The power grid won't be a problem." "Keiko, I need you to find me the fastest route to those fusion generators. Forget about stealth. I want speed and accessibility. Marcus, you're with me on the underground approach." "We're going to hit them where they don't expect it, from below." Admiral Zexthar leaned forward in his chair, his crystalline skin now cycling through colors of deep concern. "Are they planning to assault an entrenched position by attacking its infrastructure from underneath? That's actually brilliant, but incredibly dangerous." The human squad split into 2 teams with the kind of seamless coordination that spoke of extensive real-world experience. Sarah and Marcus began their descent into the underground infrastructure, while Dmitri, Keiko, and David maintained pressure on the surface defenses to keep the enemy's attention focused upward. What happened next challenged every assumption the galactic community held about proper military tactics. Instead of carefully mapping the underground systems and identifying safe approach routes, Sarah and Marcus simply began moving through the maintenance tunnels at full speed, using their helmet lights and tactical scanners to navigate in real time. Their progress through the underground maze was tracked on the tactical display, showing them taking direct routes through areas that most species would consider too dangerous or unstable for military operations. Their environmental adaptation is remarkable, noted Professor Veltani, a geological specialist who had been studying the simulation's underground terrain. Those tunnel systems were designed to be nearly impassable, flooding, structural instability, automated defense systems, yet they're moving through them as if they were simple corridor networks. Above ground, Dmitri had begun what could only be described as a one-man war against the enemy's defensive positions. The heavy weapons specialist wasn't just suppressing enemy fire. He was systematically destroying each defensive emplacement with such overwhelming firepower that the simulation's AI couldn't replace them fast enough. His ammunition expenditure rate would have been considered wasteful by galactic standards, but his tactical effectiveness was undeniable. Keiko provided overwatch and reconnaissance, her small frame moving through the ruins with predatory grace. Her ability to identify and eliminate enemy spotters and snipers was keeping the team's casualties at zero, despite their aggressive approach. More importantly, she was continuously feeding tactical information to her underground teammates, allowing them to coordinate their assault with split-second timing. David Thompson had established a mobile medical station behind a collapsed building, but his concept of medical support was unlike anything taught in galactic military academies. While treating simulated civilian casualties, he was simultaneously providing electronic warfare support, hacking enemy communication systems, and coordinating supply drops for his teammates. His multitasking abilities were straining the simulation's ability to process multiple simultaneous actions. "They're approaching the fusion generators," Captain Velnara announced, her voice tight with anticipation. On the underground display, Sarah and Marcus had navigated through the tunnel system in just 12 minutes, a journey that the simulation's designers had estimated would take most cadet squads at least 6 hours. They now stood outside the primary power generation facility, studying the automated defenses that protected the fusion reactors. "Standard approach would be electronic warfare to disable the security systems," Sarah's voice carried clearly through the communications link. "But that takes time we don't have. Marcus, what's the structural situation if we just blow everything up?" "Fusion generators are designed to shut down safely if their containment is breached," Marcus replied while scanning the facility's construction specifications. "We'll lose power to the entire district, but no radiation hazard. The explosion will probably bring down half the government complex above us." "Perfect. Plant the charges." Professor Kethvar's tentacles nearly tied themselves in knots. "They're going to destroy the fusion generators? That's not tactical thinking. That's wholesale destruction." "But it will work," Admiral Zexthar admitted reluctantly. "Their casualties will be minimal. Civilian evacuations are already complete, and the enemy forces will be completely neutralized. It's brutal, but effective." The countdown began as Marcus finished placing his demolition charges throughout the power generation facility. Above ground, Dmitri had ceased his suppressing fire and begun withdrawing toward a safe distance, while Keiko and David coordinated the final evacuation of any remaining simulated civilians from the blast zone. "All teams, 30 seconds to detonation," Sarah announced. "Take cover and prepare for immediate assault on the command center once the lights go out." The explosion, when it came, was spectacular even by the Academy's standards. The fusion generator's emergency shutdown created a cascade of secondary explosions that rippled through the underground infrastructure, while the loss of power plunged the entire government district into darkness. The enemy's defensive positions, dependent on automated systems and electronic coordination, found themselves suddenly blind and unable to communicate. The humans emerged from cover before the debris had finished falling. Their assault on the darkened command center was a masterpiece of coordinated violence. Without power, the enemy's sophisticated defensive systems were reduced to basic weapons and manual coordination. The humans, trained for combat in environments far more hostile than a powerless building, moved through the facility like apex predators hunting prey. Sarah and Marcus emerged from the underground levels just as Dmitri began his assault on the main entrance. The building's defenders, already disoriented by the power loss, found themselves under attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Keiko provided overwatch and eliminated any defenders who tried to establish organized resistance, while David coordinated the team's advance from his mobile command post. Approaching primary objective, Sarah reported as the squad reached the upper levels of the command center. Resistance is sporadic and poorly coordinated. The final obstacle was the command center itself, a heavily armored chamber where the enemy's leadership was supposed to make their last stand. Historical records showed that this phase of the battle had originally lasted for 2 weeks, with defenders holding out until reinforcements could arrive. The humans didn't even slow down. Dmitri placed a single demolition charge against the armored door, stepped back, and triggered the explosion. The blast door, designed to withstand orbital bombardment, held for approximately 3 seconds before the shaped charge created a breach large enough for assault entry. "Breach! Breach! Breach!" Sarah called as the squad poured through the opening with textbook precision. The enemy leadership, programmed to respond to conventional siege tactics, had no protocols for dealing with an assault that had progressed from initial contact to final objective in less than 2 hours. Their surrender was immediate and unconditional. "Simulation complete," announced the automated system, its synthetic voice carrying what almost sounded like confusion. "Primary objective achieved. Secondary objectives achieved. Tertiary objectives achieved. All civilian rescue protocols completed successfully. Time elapsed. 1 hour, 57 minutes, 43 seconds. The observation deck fell into stunned silence. "This breaks every record in Academy history," Professor Kethvar whispered. "It breaks every assumption we had about human military capabilities," Admiral Zexthar corrected. "Captain, what's the simulation's assessment of their performance?" Captain Velnara studied her displays with growing amazement. "Sir, the AI is requesting a complete tactical review. According to its analysis, the humans' approach wasn't just effective, it was optimal for their specific capabilities and training. The simulation's standard parameters were based on average galactic species limitations, not Deathworlder adaptations. On the main screen, the 5 human cadets were conducting their post-action review with the same matter-of-fact professionalism they had shown throughout the entire operation. To them, their performance wasn't extraordinary. It was simply the application of training and tactics that had been developed on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds. "So," David Thompson was saying as he checked his medical supplies, "Standard Earth doctrine worked pretty well in an alien environment. Who would have thought?" Admiral Zexthar realized that the galaxy's understanding of human military capability was about to undergo a fundamental revision. The implications for future conflicts, alliance structures, and galactic security were staggering. These weren't just competent soldiers. They were representatives of a species that had weaponized survival itself. The Academy's main conference hall had been hastily converted into a debriefing chamber, its circular seating arrangement now packed with military officers, tactical analysts, and academic researchers from across the galaxy. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and barely contained excitement as the 5 human cadets stood at the center, seemingly unaware of the revolutionary nature of what they had just accomplished. Admiral Zexthar called the emergency session to order, his crystalline skin still cycling through colors of amazement and concern. "Before we begin the formal debriefing, I want the record to reflect that what we witnessed today represents the single most extraordinary performance in the Crucible simulation's 800-year history." Murmurs of agreement and disbelief rippled through the assembled observers. Representatives from the Krillian hegemony whispered among themselves in their clicking language, while the normally stoic Zentari delegation showed obvious signs of agitation. Even the usually unflappable Vorthak military attachés seemed unsettled by the implications of the humans' performance. Cadet Chen, Admiral Zexthar addressed the human squad leader, your team completed a simulation that typically requires 7 to 14 days in under 2 hours. This performance is so far beyond established parameters that our systems initially flagged it as a technical malfunction. Would you care to explain your tactical approach? Sarah Chen stepped forward, her posture relaxed but respectful. Sir, we applied standard Terran military doctrine adapted for the specific scenario parameters. The simulation presented us with urban warfare conditions similar to operations we train for regularly on Earth. We simply executed according to our established protocols. Professor Kethvar's tentacles writhed with scholarly excitement. Cadet, when you say standard doctrine, can you elaborate on what that entails? Your approach seemed to prioritize speed and overwhelming force over the careful methodical advancement that most military traditions favor. Marcus Rodriguez fielded this question with the easy confidence of someone explaining basic facts. Sir, on Earth we have a saying, violence of action solves more problems than patience. Our doctrine is built around the principle that any conflict you're not winning quickly is a conflict you're probably losing. Extended engagements favor the defender and increase casualty rates among both military personnel and civilians. Dr. Wheelithara leaned forward, her compound eyes focusing intently on the humans. But surely such aggressive tactics result in higher equipment losses and resource expenditure. Your ammunition and energy consumption rates were extraordinary. David Thompson responded with a slight smile. Ma'am, Earth logistics doctrine is based on the assumption that any operation might be cut off from resupply at any time. We train to carry everything we need and use it efficiently, but we also train to improvise solutions from available materials. The simulation environment provided abundant resources if you knew how to adapt them. Adapt them how? Asked Captain Velnara, genuinely curious. Dmitri used civilian construction equipment as improvised demolition tools when his military explosives ran low, Keiko explained matter-of-factly. I commandeered enemy communication systems to supplement our reconnaissance capabilities. David hacked civilian medical facilities to expand our treatment options. We're trained to see every environment as a potential source of tactical advantages. The galactic officers exchanged glances of growing comprehension and concern. What the humans were describing wasn't just military training, it was a completely different philosophy of warfare based on adaptation, improvisation, and the assumption that any situation could become desperate without warning. Cadet Petrov, Admiral Zexthar addressed the heavy weapons specialist, your demolition work was extensive. Were you concerned about infrastructure preservation or collateral damage limitations? Dimitri's response was delivered with the patient tone of someone explaining the obvious. Sir, the mission parameters were clear. Eliminate enemy forces, rescue civilians, destroy military capability. Infrastructure that serves military purposes becomes a legitimate target. Infrastructure that doesn't serve military purposes gets preserved. It's a simple calculation. But you destroyed entire city blocks, protested Professor Veltani. Empty city blocks that provided cover for enemy forces, Sarah Chen interjected. Our reconnaissance confirmed civilian evacuation before any demolition operations. Earth doctrine prioritizes human life above all other considerations. But once human safety is assured, any resource denial that shortens conflict duration is considered beneficial. The implications of this statement sent a visible shudder through the assembled observers. The humans weren't just efficient soldiers. They were representatives of a military philosophy that treated warfare as a problem to be solved through the application of overwhelming force and tactical innovation, rather than a contest to be won through superior strategy and patience. There's something else we need to discuss, Admiral Zexthar said, consulting his notes with obvious reluctance. The simulation's AI conducted a post-action analysis of your performance. According to its calculations, your tactics would have been even more effective in a real combat situation. "How is that possible?" asked Commander Thex Ali of the Aquarian Defense Force. Captain Velnara activated the holographic display, showing the AI's analytical breakdown. The simulation was designed with safety parameters that actually limited the human's tactical options. In a real combat environment, their ability to improvise would have been even more pronounced, and their willingness to accept calculated risks would have allowed for even faster mission completion. The AI estimates that in actual combat conditions, with real stakes and unlimited improvisation opportunities, the human squad could have completed the same objectives in approximately 45 minutes, Admiral Zexthar announced. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. "That's impossible," Professor Kethvar finally whispered. "No species could sustain that level of tactical aggression without suffering catastrophic casualties." "Sir," Sarah Chen said quietly, "with respect, I think there might be a fundamental misunderstanding about human physiology and psychology. We're not just trained for this type of combat. We're evolved for it. Earth didn't just produce soldiers. Earth produced a species that treats survival as a moment-to-moment proposition." David Thompson stepped forward to support his squad leader's point. "Every human on our world grows up dealing with environmental hazards that would be considered active military threats on most other planets. Natural predators, extreme weather, seismic activity, toxic atmospheres in certain regions, radiation exposure from solar activity. We develop adaptive responses to life-threatening situations from childhood. What Cadet Thompson is explaining," added Dr. Wylethara, who had been studying human psychology extensively, "is that their performance wasn't exceptional by their standards. It was typical. They approach military operations with the same mindset they use for basic survival on their homeworld." The full weight of this revelation settled over the conference hall like a gravity field. The galaxy's military establishments had been measuring human capabilities against the standards of species that had evolved on relatively peaceful worlds. They had completely failed to account for what it meant to evolve on a Class 12 death world. "Admiral," said General Krexthor of the Krillian War College, his voice carrying new respect and wariness, "I believe we need to revise our understanding of the Terran Federation's military potential." "Agreed," Admiral Zexthar replied. "But there's one more issue we need to address. According to Federation records, these 5 cadets represent average performance standards for human military personnel. They're not elite special forces. They're standard infantry with basic training." This statement caused an immediate uproar among the assembled officers. Representatives from every major military power began talking at once, their voices blending into a cacophony of concern and disbelief. "If these are their basic infantry capabilities," Commander Thex Ali said once order was restored, "what are their elite units capable of?" Sarah Chen exchanged glances with her squad mates before answering. "Sir, that information is classified above our security clearance level. But I can tell you that special operations candidates are selected from the top 1% of standard infantry personnel." The implications hung in the air like a threat. If average human soldiers could accomplish in 2 hours what took elite galactic forces 2 weeks, what could the humans' best warriors accomplish? "There's one final point I need to make," Admiral Zexthar said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had reached a momentous decision. "The Galactic Military Academy was founded to train defenders of peace and civilization. Today we learned that there is a species among us that doesn't just defend civilization. They are civilization's immune system, evolved to eliminate threats with overwhelming efficiency." He paused, looking at each of the human cadets in turn. "I'm recommending to the Galactic Council that human military doctrine be studied and adapted by all member species, not because we want to become more like humans, but because we need to understand what we're allied with. "And what are we allied with, sir?" asked Professor Kethvar. Admiral Zexthar's response would be quoted in military academies throughout the galaxy for generations to come. "We are allied with a species that evolved on a world so hostile that they developed warfare not as an extension of politics, but as an extension of survival. They don't fight to win battles. They fight to eliminate threats so completely that those threats can never return. When humans go to war, they're not conducting military operations. They're conducting pest control on a galactic scale." The 5 human cadets stood quietly at the center of the conference hall, unaware that they had just redefined the galaxy's understanding of military power. To them, they had simply completed a training exercise using the skills they had learned growing up on humanity's beautiful, terrible, wonderfully deadly homeworld. As the debriefing session concluded, and the galactic officers dispersed to carry news of the day's events to their respective governments, Sarah Chen turned to her teammates with a satisfied smile. "Well, that went pretty well. Anyone else hungry? I heard the Academy cafeteria has actual Earth food today." The casual normalcy of the statement, delivered in the aftermath of the most revolutionary military demonstration in galactic history, somehow made their performance even more impressive. These weren't warriors drunk on victory or soldiers celebrating an exceptional achievement. They were humans, doing what humans did best: adapting, surviving, and making it look easy. The galaxy would never be quite the same.